The internet, as always, did not let go. With a mouth, tearing yawn, I scrolled through the lines that had long become familiar and looked at the clock almost every second, which was desperately approaching morning. But for some reason, I did not want to sleep. I continued to wander the World Wide Web, looking for at least a hint of something fresh and interesting. But apparently the network itself hinted to me that it was time to sleep. Having found nothing worth paying attention to, I, as always, left the player playing random tracks overnight and settled down on a pillow. Endlessly twitching and straightening the blanket, I finally began to fall asleep. Something was howling. Banging and rustling outside the window. Shouts could be heard outside the walls. Music was playing, and some kind of clanging was heard. In a house with walls like ours, this was not surprising. I seemed to enjoy these sounds through a light nap and continued to fall asleep more and more, feeling the numbness of my body. Suddenly, the door of the room opened slightly. As it seemed to me at the time, it was a cat because I felt a slight pressure in my legs. I opened my eyes for a moment, as it happens in a half-dream, and immediately closed them. I don't remember how much time has passed since that moment. But it seemed to me that after a couple of minutes, I opened my eyes and saw that the light in the bathroom was on. Although I live alone and I always turn off the lights everywhere at night, shifting my gaze slightly over the bed, I saw that a shadow was crawling there. Before I had time to focus on her, I noticed movement behind the door. It will be useful to mention here that the door from my room has glass in the middle. A vague creature, as tall as the ceiling with a strange red appendage just below the back of its head, was slowly moving from the bathtub into the corridor. I couldn't see the face, but such a neck was physically unable to hold the head, and he also slid the top of his head along the ceiling, leaving a dark, smoking trail. Suddenly, he disappeared somewhere, and again, my attention was attracted by a shadow just above my bed. She started crawling on my feet. For the first few seconds, it seemed like an eternity to me. I watched her clinging to the blanket, climbing, and suddenly I saw a pale, angry face. It screeched, "Well, now we're alone," and rushed at me with the agility of a snake. I screamed, jumped back to the headboard, hit the back of my head against the wall, and everything was gone. When I was 13 years old, my family and I bought an apartment. One day, Dad and Mom went to visit. I didn't want to go. 2 hours have passed. There was a knock on the door. I thought they finally came. I open. No one. It was getting dark. I was calling my mom. The subscriber was not available. I was calling my dad. The same thing. I felt a little scared, and I sat down to watch TV, and suddenly the lights go out. It was already 21:14. Winter. I was sitting on the couch in total darkness and shaking with fear. I think they would have turned on the lights as soon as possible. About 4 minutes later, there is another knock on the door. I, not seeing anything, get up and grope. I go to the door. I hear a crash behind me. I turn around. Everything is quiet. I'm opening the latch. No one. I became unbearably scared, and I started calling my mom and dad. Finally, Mom answered. "Hello." "Mom, where are you?" "I'm afraid." "Come home." "Daughter, we'll be late." "Okay, well." I was shocked. Mom didn't react at all to the words. I'm scared. I lit a candle. The flame flickered in different directions. As if in a storm, although it was standing still, and the windows were closed. It made me uneasy. A shadow passed quickly by me, and the candle went out. There was a lot of noise. Doors were opening and closing. Unable to stand it, I shouted, "Enough. Enough." Abruptly, everything went quiet. There was dead silence. Without thinking twice, I flew out of the house, knocking everything down on the fly. I met my mom and dad on the landing. They started shouting, "Why was your phone turned off? I've called you 5 times. I say, "Mom, you had your phone turned off yourself, and you said you'd be late." She shook her head and said she hadn't said it. And the phone was on. I briefly described what happened to me in the apartment. We decided to go to Grandma's. We quickly got into the car and looked at the window. The light was visible from the window. It turned off and on, as if someone was playing with it. When we arrived, we told Grandma everything. She said that her best friend lived there, but she died soon after. And now, this house is cursed. Everyone escapes from there. Then, everything got better. We went to pick up things in the morning and met the neighbors on doorstep. They said that there was such a roar at night that our ears hurt. Dishes were breaking, things were falling, etc. When we entered, everything was scattered. We told the neighbors what happened. They helped us pack our things, and we went to another apartment, and nothing happens there. It pleases. My friend's grandmother is a very prominent woman with snow, white hair arranged in a high hairstyle, always well dressed. It's hard not to notice her, and always, no matter how many years have passed. We greeted her. Although her granddaughter has not lived in our yard for a long time. They have an expensive large apartment, and we live in the city center. Her husband holds a high position, and her car always took her to work. In general, there is reason for envy. But in fact, this woman is very intelligent and kind. That's what she said. As always, a man is still quite old. Having money is always an object for women with certain goals, as a rule, much younger than his legal wife. It so happened that my friend's grandmother began to notice oddities in her husband's behavior. Then after work, then he will go to a business meeting, etc. And one day he became very ill. With acute pains, he was taken away in an ambulance, and the woman was confronted with the fact that her husband needed long-term treatment for unknown reasons. The doctors failed to diagnose him immediately, and he was sent for a long-term examination. Weeks passed, but her husband did not feel better, and other oddities began. After my husband was taken to the hospital, it became difficult to stay in their apartment. An unbearable stench began to come from somewhere. Certain silhouettes appeared, and my grandmother also told me that one day she was sitting at home alone and watching TV. Suddenly it seemed to her that someone ran past. Then again, something pretty big, maybe the size of a cat. Yes, it also spun like a top. The carpet it crawled under seemed to be stirred by the wind. After that, she became so scared that the unfortunate woman decided to turn to a person with psychic abilities, popularly to a sorcerer. She was immediately recommended a reliable person, not the one who advertises in the newspaper, but a real village hermit sorcerer who lives somewhere in the region and is quite difficult to get to. If it wasn't for acquaintances, she wouldn't even know where he lives. Eerily, when she arrived at his house, the sorcerer, a gloomy old man, was waiting for her on the threshold, as if he already knew about the arrival of a visitor. It was clear from the first words that he knew everything. That's what he said. "It's all your husband's mistress's fault. He brought her home while you were gone, and I see it, put something in the pillows. Look in the pillows. Look in the pillows. There's a reason for everything. If nothing is done, your husband will die, and you will have no life in this apartment. What you find in the pillows, you will carry in a blind bag. Do not touch it with your hands. To a wasteland where people do not walk, and burn it, pronouncing the words that I will teach you. Leave, without looking back. The woman went home in shock, and the first thing she did was rip open the pillows on which she and her husband slept. There was no limit to her surprise and fear. Inside, all the pillows were neatly cut out, and inside were enclosed, something like memorial wreaths, dried flowers, etc. She wrapped it all in bags, as the sorceress said, without touching it with her hands, and carried it to the wasteland. When the woman threw it into the fire, it didn't want to burn at first, but when she began to say special words, the muck immediately crackled and smoke poured out. She decided to leave immediately, but her legs wouldn't obey her. I couldn't get out of my seat, that's all. Then she began to repeat the words of her grandfather again, and it seemed to let her go. She left, without once looking back. After that, everything stopped in the apartment. My grandfather felt better and was discharged. How they reconciled is another story, but about the woman with whom her husband had an affair. My friend's grandmother soon found out that she was seriously ill.